Avantasia has a new album coming out next year. Coroner is doing a U.S. tour in 2025. Induction, they announce a new singer and a new lineup. And of course, Charlie Benante from Anthrax talks about how streaming is where music goes to die. All of that next here on the Metal Command podcast, plus a couple of interview announcements next.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome back to the Metal Command podcast on this wonderful December 1st, 2024. This cold Sunday here in the part of the United States that I come from, and I'm really excited to be here. And as always, I do appreciate any support you do give to this show. So if you like what you see in here on the podcast, by all means, hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video here on YouTube. And if you are following the show on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a follow there. Going to talk about the upcoming Avantasia album. I'm going to touch on Coroner coming to the United States and doing a U.S. tour in 2025. I believe they're coming to my neck of the woods in March. Charlie Benante goes on a rant about the music industry. I have some thoughts on that as well. And again, I'm really excited for the band Induction, one of my favorite power metal bands in recent memory. So going to get to some announcements first. Before I even get to these four topics, I have a couple interviews coming up. Dominic Sebastian from Sirius Black. I'm going to be putting that interview up. A really nice guy. Sirius Black, of course, did a phenomenal job on their last album. I got a very good review from myself. I think this is much better than their last album. And Dominic was really, really cool. So that interview is going up. And folks, I have a surprise for you. This is going to be a little bit unexpected because it was a bit unexpected for me. And that is I will be putting up an interview I just did with Andy Darris from Halloween. Andy offered to take some time off from take a little bit of time for me during the production of Halloween's newest album that will be coming out next year. And I've known him for a very, very long time. I used to work for Halloween for a very, very long time, and they aren't really doing any press because everybody's concentrating on the new album. But he did offer to come on. I'm not going to say no. Andy has come on this show probably almost every year. Probably almost every year since I started my radio show back in 1998. So, but he offered to come on the show, talk about the record, give a little bit of an update of what's going on with the band, talk about the live album. We talk about the tour that they have coming up, the 40th anniversary tour. We talk about the opening band, Beast in Black. We talk about a lot of really cool stuff. And, you know, I'll be honest with you. I've known those guys a very long time, going on 27 years. And I have followed them very closely. It's not every day you get to know and follow your favorite heavy metal band of all time, but I've had that privilege. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm really grateful that Andy took the time to sit down and talk with me. So that interview will be coming very, very soon. Now let's get to the first topic, something of a more positive note before I get into the more negative stuff. Actually, most of the show is pretty positive, but we have a new Avantasia album coming out. And I'm really excited for it. It's called... the name of the album is called Here Be Dragons. I'm going to read you the press release and the quote from Tobias Sammet really quick. He says, "This new album carries the most adventurous and bold spirit my music has had in decades, and it's rather reckless, fearless, powerful, and uplifting, and not introverted at all. While my previous albums allowed me to get a lot off my chest, this time I dove headfirst into the creative flood crafting 10 discrete musical pictures that miraculously merged into what I believe is the tightest chapter in Avantasia's history. I did everything exactly how I wanted it, approaching the album with unrelenting determination and a carefree attitude that was reminiscent of my early days way before the metal opera thing, when I felt unstoppable and let instinct just write songs. Right now, I'm bursting with energy and can't wait to unleash Here Be Dragons and then kick off the big tour with our new stage. We'll present the new material alongside our classics and some rarities in the most spectacular stage show Avantasia has ever delivered. An early Merry Christmas to everybody. There's a lot to take from that. First of all, where he says he had unrelenting determination and a carefree attitude. I can tell you flat out right now, having hosted this show for almost 27 years, I had Tobias Sammet on my show a lot in the early days, and he is not wrong when it came to unrelenting determination. So I'm going to tell you guys a story. Before I get into this album, I'm going to tell you guys a story, a pre-Avantasia story. So I just mentioned earlier, I used to work for Halloween. And I remember, now he wasn't in the band at the time, obviously, but in 1999, I interviewed Michael Kiske. And, back then, it was one of those things where you ended up getting people's phone numbers, right? You would call them and then you do the interview over the phone. That's kind of how things were done, 25, 26 years ago. Okay. And I interviewed Michael Kiske, and I put that interview online, and obviously it aired on my show. And I had Tobias Sammet on my show quite a bit. In fact, Tobias Sammet, to me, when he talks about unrelenting determination, he I'll be honest with you, some of the stories he told me about when it went into the Vainglory opera album and how it was produced, etc. I mean, it is the epitome of unrelenting determination. This dude, I remember first listening to that Vainglory opera album, and back then you didn't have streaming, you didn't have any of that stuff. And I remember contacting AFM Records, which had like no distribution over here in the United States at all. And the internet was still mostly dial-up. So you didn't have like it wasn't fast enough to really stream a lot of music the way that it does now. So I can attest to that unrelenting determination. Now, to go back to the previous statement I made, I had Michael Kiske on my show. This is 1999. He had a second solo album that had come out called Readiness to Sacrifice, and had a very long conversation. And again, when you do these interviews with people, they get your phone number, you get their phone number. It's just what happened. And you just had to be a journalist, and you just didn't give it out to anybody. So one morning, it was a Saturday morning, I get this phone call. And, it's got to be like, 9 a.m. on a Saturday, 8 a.m. I think it was pretty early. And I get the phone. Someone gives me the phone. They were asking for me, and it was Tobias Sammet. And he was asking me for Michael Kiske's phone number. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Being very new at this, I was very hesitant to give him that, because when you get these phone numbers, you are explicitly told you cannot give them to anybody. So I said, look, I can't give it to you, but maybe I could give you the phone number of somebody who can give it to you. This is how I worked around this. So I remember calling Roland Grappow, who was in Halloween at the time. I said, Roland, this dude wants Kiske's number. I don't want to give it to him. Maybe if he calls you, maybe you can give it to him. Can I give him your phone number? And Roland said yes. So I call Tobias Sammet back. I tell him, look, this is Roland Grappow's number. He can give you the number. And I did that because I wanted to wash my hand. I did not want to give him the number, because if Michael Kiske were to blow up on him or get mad, he's going to know probably where Tobias Sammet maybe got the phone number from. Now, granted, in 1999, it was like I was 20, 21 years old at the time. And so I was young and inexperienced. And I'm going to tell you why I'm glad I didn't give him the number and why I sent him to Roland here in a second. But he called Roland Grappo up, ended up getting Kiske's number. And the rest, as they say, is history. Maybe he got Marcus Groskov's number. I don't know. But all of a sudden, shortly after that, you hear about Avantasia, the metal opera. And there's a guy named Ernie, which, of course, was Michael Kiske. Funnily enough, years later, Michael Kiske comes on this show. And I had met him a couple times. I never really had really said anything to him about this, but off the record, I told him this story. And ironically, when I was telling him about it, he said, if I had called Michael Kiske and told him who wanted the number, he said he might have said no back then. I just think I just thought that was interesting. Now, granted, he had no idea who Tobias Sammet was at the time. So that was the other hesitation. And you might ask, why didn't I call Kiske and say, hey, this guy wants your number? Again, I didn't know him that well. And I still really don't know him that well, to where I could just call the guy up and be like, hey, this dude wants your number. I don't know why, but he wants your phone number. So the rest, as they say, is history, but I didn't know anything about Avantasia or rock opera or anything like that until it obviously was announced and he was on it. So just a funny bit of history some of you may or may not know. And I actually found something really funny. I'll probably touch on this in a future podcast. I have a really funny prank call Tobias Sammet did where he called in on the air on a radio show and messed with Marcus Grauskopf. It was about 25 years ago. It was around the time The Dark Ride came out. But I will probably get to that later on. And maybe I'll bring that out. Who knows? But anyhow, back to Avantasia. You know, the interesting part about it, and every time I go on social media, I always look at, people will ask and bring this up quite often. And they say, wow, when is another Ed Guy album going to come out? Right? And the way I look at Avantasia is kind of what Ed Guy became. Kind of in the same manner as Trans-Siberian Orchestra is what the band Sabotage became. It's sort of evolved into that. And that's the same way I look at Ed Guy. Because Avantasia is absolutely phenomenal. And as these Avantasia albums ended up getting better, I thought, with the exception of maybe the album Space Police, I thought Ed Guy albums were they were not getting worse, but they weren't as good as the early stuff. But the Avantasia albums are getting better. They're getting better. The songwriting's getting better. And so it makes sense that, why would Tobias Sammet, and this is for the people that have brought this up, why wouldn't he put 110% effort into Avantasia? You have all these great singers, and that's kind of how I look at that. I know there's some of you that wish an Ed Guy album would come out, but truthfully, I am glad things are the way they are. Now, the last Ed Guy album, I believe, was Space Police. I thought that was actually a very good album. But in a sense, with Avantasia, you're getting not only the Avantasia stuff, but you do get a lot of the elements that made Ed Guy great. And so when he goes and says something in this press release that says, I felt unstoppable and let instinct just write the songs, I truly believe, and this is my gut feeling, that this next Avantasia album could possibly be the best one they've ever done. I know that's a bold statement. In my opinion, Avantasia has never put anything out that was ever bad or that sucked. Everything they've done is phenomenal. And the one thing Tobias Sammet has, and one of the biggest talents that he has, and it's not a talent that every musician has. He has the ability to pick out the right singers and the right musicians And he has the ability to write music that fits their voice. Now, folks, not many people have a talent like that. You know, I always talk about Ian Lucas and Averion having that talent. Tobias Sammet has that talent too. And when you look at the body of work that this man has done since the mid-90s, it is absolutely phenomenal. I remember hearing Vainglory Opera, folks, for the first time, and I thought to myself, this band is going places. Tobias Sammet is going places. This is a guy that is going to be immensely successful. And Avantasia is going to probably be one of the greatest things that's ever happened to the metal scene. And you know what? It has been. Like, I went back the other day and was listening to all of the Avantasia albums from the first album to the most recent one. I can't find a bad album in that discography. And I am really excited to hear that his attitude towards this is very similar to the early days. Because, folks, I can tell you, talking to this man on the phone, Tobias Sammet, the intensity, the desire to really make great music, and having fun making that music, man, it was there. It was funny because he's like a month younger than I am. So I'll be honest. I'm really excited. And I think this next Avantasia album is going to be phenomenal. I can't wait for the first lyric video. I cannot wait for the first bit of music from this. But I think this could be one of, if not their best album. That is my gut feeling. Looking at that statement, and the way he said he's approaching the album, folks, I'm excited. Now let me get into the next bit of business here. Let's go on to the next subject. That is the band Coroner. Folks, is there any band out there more criminally underrated than these guys? If you've never listened to Coroner, if you've never listened to an album like Mental Vortex or No More Color, I have to say, Tommy Vetterli is probably one of the greatest guitar players I have ever heard. When I think of bands on Noise Records, everybody thinks of Creator, everybody thinks of Halloween or Gravedigger or Rage or Celtic Frost. They think of these bands for the most part. One of the bands people seem to forget about is the band Coroner. Now, for me, I thought that they were one of the most unique bands, not only back then, but now. First couple albums, not bad, but when No More Color came out, when Mental Vortex came out, those are two game-changing albums. Basically very progressive thrash metal that you just don't hear every day. I mean, I can't even think of any bands that sound like them. But folks, they were the real deal, and they still are. Now, I know Coroner is making an album and recording an album. I know there have been interviews out there talking about that. But man, I get to see them live. They're coming to my neck of the woods. They're coming to Cleveland. I'm really excited for that. It's a small club. But man, coming to Cleveland, getting to see Coroner is like it's like a bucket list band I've never been able to see, right? I know they had I had their old drummer on the show This had to be, man, it was a long time ago. 2011, maybe? Somewhere around there. When they first kind of got back together and started playing shows again. But just my thoughts with the band Coroner. Mental Vortex is in my top 50 albums of all time. That is how good that album is. No More Color isn't far behind. I don't have it in the top 50, but it's definitely another really phenomenal album. But those two albums. Now, they had an album called Grin. That was the last real full-length album. That had some pretty cool stuff on it. And the one thing about Coroner that's unique, none of their albums sounded the same. The first album definitely didn't sound like the second one. And No More Color didn't sound like anything they've done. Mental Vortex didn't sound like anything they had ever done. And the album Grin was just drastically different from anything they had done. It was a very sad day for the metal world when they didn't put any actual full-length albums out after that. I mean, they had a compilation. But I just want to make sure all of you know I'm extremely excited for Coroner to come to the USA. Coming up next, before I go into break, Charlie Benante talks about how streaming is where music goes to die, and I talk about the new lineup in one of my favorite power metal bands, Induction, the Metal Command podcast, and we'll be right back after this. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support. Okay, back here on the Metal Command podcast, here to talk about the next topic. This was all about Charlie Benante from Anthrax talking about the music industry. And he says in the headline here, and it's all on alternativenation.net, it was a post on their Facebook page, it says, Charlie Benante thinks Metallica was right about streaming services, says they steal, and that Spotify is where music goes to die. I'm going to read a couple parts from this statement, but you can check it out if you want. He says, there is no music industry. This is what has changed. He responded, there is nothing anymore. There are people listening to music, but they are not listening to music the way music was once listened to. It is a different time now. And one of the quotes that he talks about is, I don't subscribe to Spotify. I think it's where music goes to die. We have the music on there because we have to play along with the effing game, but I'm tired of playing the game. And he also says that artists get taken advantage of the most out of any industry. Can't say he's wrong there. Folks, he's not wrong. Not at all. In fact, he said something very similar to myself back in 2018. Now, Charlie Benante was actually the first guest I ever had on my radio show. And we did an interview back in 2018 where I was celebrating the 20th anniversary of the show, and I had invited a lot of the people that were still alive, for that matter, onto the show who came on during the first year of the show to do an interview, and Charlie Benante was one of those people. This interview clip is him talking about the music industry with myself on my radio show back in 2018. Check this out.
Well, I think what happened with the music business was the ground kind of fell out from beneath all of us, and everybody kind of scrambled to think of ways of compensating for what had just happened or what has been taking place. Mm-hmm. And I think some bands who thought they were maybe smarter than other bands started to do things where we'll give the music for free and you tell us what you want to pay for it. And I thought that was really stupid to do, because maybe they thought that was the great thing at the time, but I felt it was just devaluing music and what we were doing. I mean, why would you do that? Does that mean that all these chefs from around the world are saying, just come to my restaurant. If you like the food, just pay what you want, or don't even pay at all. Don't worry about it. I'll survive. And I just thought that was a real ignorant thing to do. And if we go deeper into this conversation of why this happened, you really have to put a lot of blame on the tech industry. As much as everybody loves Apple, I also think Apple had a big hand in destroying music. And nobody really says that. Everybody's still on the side of Apple, but I believe Apple was one of the big hands in this that helped destroy music. The record companies had a big hand in it because they got greedy. The artists got greedy when they felt, I could get a 3-album deal for $75 million. But at the end of the day, if they're taking all that money, what happens to the lesser-known bands who are striving to become something? What happens? Where does that money come from? I mean, it was just such a mess. And it really dug a hole for itself. And now who's paying for it? Everybody.
I've been doing this radio show for such a long time, as we talked before, and, it seems like the record companies really have not found any kind of successful business model to adapt to the more modern times either.
No, they're not going to either, because of streaming sites are very successful. And it just goes to show me, especially, I'm an audiophile, and I have to have the best quality of a song from my favorite band. But to a lot of people, that doesn't matter to them. It really doesn't. They'll listen to music on these little earbuds that really shrinks everything, and that's it, man. It's like, it's my workout tape.
Yeah.
That's how it is. So the love of music, and I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. The reason why the title of our album is called Worship Music was because I worship music. I need it in my life. I need it every day.
Right.
And what happens when the time comes when there's not enough money and people have to have a GoFundMe thing to make some music, then what happens?
Well, there's bands pretty much already doing that right now.
Yeah, I know they did, and it's like, that's sad, but that also it's like the breakdown of the family when you don't have a dad or you don't have structure anymore. That's exactly what's happened to music, and now you have to go and independently try and raise some money in order to live. Because it's all been broken down. The days of artist relations, artist development, all that stuff that was so important to, let's say a band had 3 records on a label that didn't really do so well, but then that 4th record, bam, it exploded, and then those 3 records prior to it also start moving. You'll never have that happen again.
Yeah, and it's funny, a good example, let's say Metallica. Is a good example of that. When Injustice for All came out, that was a very big record for them, and it did so well that their previous 3 albums probably started to sell because of that, and so on and so on. And now these labels, they don't know what to do anymore.
Nobody knows what to do anymore. Everybody, like I said, is just like scavengers. They'll pick up whatever. Well, maybe this will work. Or I'll try that. And that's why a lot of bands on tour are doing these meet and greet packages, because they have to find some way to fund the tour. Understand? Because records are not selling anymore, so the experience has become what is become profitable for the bands to exist, which I have a hard time with that because I still, there's a piece of me that just feels like, man, making people pay for coming to see you is weird. But now you really have no choice and to do that.
That was Charlie Benante talking about the music industry and how streaming and downloads pretty much destroyed it. He's not saying anything differently now than he did back then in 2018 when I had him on my radio show. Now, obviously, streaming was not as prevalent when that interview was recorded, but essentially he had the same viewpoints back then, and I completely agree with him. Because if you look at the quote on this, when he was asked about if he thought Metallica was justified for taking legal action against Napster in 2000, he said they were absolutely right about it. You see where it went. All those people who said F Metallica, they're rich bastards. They were protecting their art, their intellectual property, so that some a-hole does not come along and take your art. They make the money while you just make the art and you just give it away. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because musicians, the ones responsible for the actual music scene even existing, are typically the last ones to get paid. I've had that conversation with a lot of people. And if you listen to a previous podcast where I talked about record labels suddenly dropping bands and kind of more becoming like a legacy label where they're going to more or less put out back catalog stuff and reissues, and that's it. I played an interview clip with Blackie Lawless from Wasp, where he talks about the downfall of the music industry. And in case you missed that clip, here it is.
You know, the whole delivery system of the way records are done now is like I said, it's night and day because, you know, we all hated the majors. You know, we referred to them as the evil empires. But the one thing that they could do is their delivery system, that factory machinery that they had, boy, when they decided they wanted to make something happen, it was a thing of beauty to watch it go into effect on a global level. You know, and you don't have any delivery system like that anymore. I mean, the internet, you know, is as capable as it is, does not have the ability to harness entire groups of people and literally herd them in the same direction at the same time. You know, so, you know, it's like I said, it's night and day, and it doesn't work the same way as it once did. You know, the guy that developed the model that we used for 50 years was Emmett Erdogan. He was the president of Atlantic Records. And we all used that model, like I said, for 50 years. Well, the internet came along and destroyed that model, and no one has since been able to develop a working model of a delivery system that gets, and when I say delivery system, I'm talking about the ability to get music from the recording studio to the consumer's house, you know, into a kid's stereo, you know, and until a delivery system is put together that allows that to be done on a mass level, you know, because people listen to me saying now, yeah, well, I'm getting music. Well, you are, but you're not getting it on a mass level like used to happen even 10 years ago, you know. And that's the reason people say to me now, they go, you know, I was doing an interview the other day, and they said, you know, where are all the great new frontmen coming from? And I said, well, there aren't any. And I says, you know, and he says, why? And I says, well, because that huge machinery, that huge machinery that were the majors, I said, that doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing there to allow a new band to allow it to grow. There's nothing to support it, to enable it to develop. You know, and you know, so you ask me, where all those new frontmen coming from? There ain't no more. You know, you want to see Lemmy, you got to buy a ticket to Motorhead. You want to see Jeff Tate, you got to buy a ticket to Queensryche. You know, when these guys are gone, they're gone, and they ain't coming back because there is no infrastructure set up to allow young bands to develop themselves the same way. You know, I was telling this guy, I says, you know, any band that can headline festivals or play stadiums, you better check them out now while you can, because when they're gone, they're gone. You know, they're endangered species. They ain't coming back. And that's a sad thing, and I wish it wasn't that way. And I hate to be a doom prophet, but it's the truth. It just is the way it is. The majors had the ability to harness huge numbers of people and get them to go in the same direction at the same time. The internet cannot do that. The internet, although it has the ability to reach more people, cannot point all those people in a simultaneous direction simultaneously. So in other words, everybody's doing their own thing. The labels could get you to march in a single file in the direction they wanted you to go. That's not going to happen now.
Yeah. So do you think illegal downloading has really hurt things big time in the music industry?
Well, you tell me. You know, when you're listening to your local FM station and they're playing the same 50 songs over and over again, and everybody's screaming and hollering about how bad it is, well, the reason they're playing those same 50 songs is because they ain't got no new music.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very simple process. You know, when everybody crucified Lars 10 years ago for standing up to Napster, saying he was greedy and that we should be able to have the things that we want, they didn't realize what he was talking about. He understood that if he continued to do that, it wasn't the bands that you were hurting. You were going to destroy the factory where the stuff was being made.
Yeah.
If you destroy the factory, you destroy everything. I mean, we hated them out. They ripped off the fans, but more than that, they ripped off the bands.
Yeah.
We knew that. You know, and he was trying to explain that to people, and nobody wanted to hear it.
And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that interview clip with Blackie talks about the downfall of it from 2000 to 2011, 2012, when that interview aired on my radio show. And one of the things that Charlie talks about in this quote as well is, I take music very seriously, and what I do and what I write is very personal, and for someone to take it, it's not right. It is like I pay Amazon $12.99 a month, and I could just go on Amazon and I can get whatever I want. It is basically stealing. It is stealing from the artist, the people who run music streaming sites like Spotify. I agree. I have always said, too, that streaming is the new form of radio, except you get to pick the songs you want to hear whenever you want. That's the difference. And he's right. When you talk about paying, think about this. $12.99 for Amazon. Listen to as much music as you want. The artists, of course, get paid per stream. They get paid very little. I think somebody said at one point it was like 1 million streams to make minimum wage. And the crazy part about it is 84% of all music revenue is generated by streaming. It really is. These streaming companies are making tons of money off of other people's arts, off of their songs. And the artist is getting pennies for it. Now, I get there's infrastructure involved as far as the streaming apps and where the music is stored. I get there's an expense there. But when you have a company like Spotify paying $300 million, claiming to have no money, but they go and pay a soccer team, I believe it was FC Barcelona, $300 million to be a sponsor. Folks, they're making money. You just don't shell out over $250,000 to sponsor a soccer team in Spain, one of the better teams, I may add, if you're not making money. The artists are the last people to get paid, and ironically, they are the ones who essentially are the reason the scene in the business exists, which I think is BS. But think about it. You pay $12.99 for Amazon, right? In the old days, let's take Anthrax, for example. I ended up getting into Anthrax in the early 90s. First album I ever bought was Sound of White Noise. I think I paid $12.99 for the CD. Now, there was no streaming, really no internet back then. So I paid $12.99 to listen to one album. If I wanted to listen to Among the Living, I had to go buy it. Another $12.99. If I wanted to listen to Spreading the Disease, another $12.99. So you have about $40 in albums right there to listen to 3 albums. Now you could pay $12.99 and listen to millions upon millions of songs. And the artists per stream barely make any money. Folks, that's where the issue is. And Spotify is one of those things now that's pretty much relied upon by promoters. It's one of the biggest measuring sticks for promoters as to, are they going to book a tour in a certain area? So Charlie is not wrong. Folks, when Anthrax is gone, when Metallica is gone, when a lot of these other bands are gone, where's the music scene going to be? Because at some point you have to invest in new talent, right? You have to invest in the future of the scene. Right now they're not doing that. At least not in the metal scene. But when Gene Simmons comes out and says, how many iconic artists have come out since 1988? You could maybe count them on one hand. Whereas before that, in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, and even the 40s, there were a ton of iconic musicians that came out. That is the difference. And he's correct. It's where music goes to die. And talking about bands somebody should invest in that are very talented, let's end the show off on a positive note with the band Induction. They have a new album, hopefully coming out in the next couple years. They just announced a new singer, a couple other new members in the band. Induction, to me, is one of the best power metal bands to come out in the last 10 years. Seriously. From the production, and especially with the songwriting. I mean, very few power metal bands that come out these days really impress me. Induction is a band that really impressed me. Now, some of you might say, oh, well, you know the guys at Halloween, you're just biased because Tim Hansen is Kai's son. Actually, that has nothing to do with it. And in fact, I didn't even know Kai's son was in the band when I first had heard them. It wasn't until quite a bit later that I saw Tim Hansen was in the band. Folks, this band is a game changer. You know, there are some power metal bands that have come out that I really like. I like the band Metalite, for example. I like Beast in Black a lot. But for me, from a talent perspective, from a songwriting perspective, Induction is a game changer. They are up there. They should actually have a bigger following and bigger fan base than they do. Because number one, they're not writing generic power metal riffs. They don't sound like every other band out there. They have it's kind of like a mix of old school power metal with a lot of modern sounds mixed into it. It's probably the best way to put it. They have a new singer, Gabrielle Gozzi, and forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. I don't live in Europe. I'm just an American. I don't speak Italian, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But Gabrielle Gozzi, I could be mispronouncing that again. He's a new singer. Now, I wanted to hear what this guy sounded like. So he does have a YouTube page. I will link that YouTube page in the notes here on YouTube. And you can hear his auditions for the band. And man, he fits perfectly. I mean, not only does this guy sound great on the existing material, but I think they are going to record a great record with him. I think their next album is going to be a game changer, and it's going to be an album of the year candidate. When you look at the progression from Induction's first album to the second album, which the second album was probably one of my top 5 albums of the year when that came out, man, these guys are great. And it's interesting because when I met Kai Hansen backstage when Halloween played in Michigan, and I went up there, and I was talking to him, and I was telling him how awesome of a guitar player and songwriter I think that his son is, his response to me, he basically told me that his son is a better guitar player than he is. Kai is a legend. He is probably, him and Wyke are two of the godfathers of power metal. Just, it is what it is. I've known Wyke for years. I know him really well. I don't know Kai that well. But I can tell you, his kid, Tim, listening to their new singer, Tim Hansen's a talented guy. And he has brought together, in my opinion, probably the right people for this next album. I think this next album is going to be, in my opinion, could be one of the greatest power metal albums that's ever come out. I cannot begin to tell you how much I am looking forward to that album. I cannot begin to tell you how much I cannot wait for the next Induction album. Thank you for watching and listening to the Metal Command podcast. If you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And, of course, if you are following me on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.